So you're looking at a generic Facebook profile. And I think, we take this sort of information for granted. But if you were, sitting in a remote country, somewhere in Europe or Asia, or the other way around, and you wanted to look up somebody and be able to tell their entire employment history, what books they like, what music they like, what their birth date is, where their contact info is, what their home address is. This sort of an information would have been terribly difficult for you to capture even 3 years ago. But that information today is not terribly difficult to capture because people are volunteering this information on their social spaces. So that's my obvious point here. The non-obvious point is if you look at different parts of social media applications and you apply psychology to it. By the way, I'm a quack psychologist. I don't have a psychology degree. I have a computer science degree. But if you apply psychology to it, there's a lot of things you can glean about that individual. For example, if individuals or human beings who fill out information like this for their own social profiles are subconsciously usually aware that they're filling this out for other people to read, right? So if you had a private teenage diary where you had to fill out what your favorite music is, what you love, what you hate, and you know that nobody else is going to read it, you are likely to put slightly different information there than in a profile that you know other people are going to read, right? And there are ways to kind of be able to tell such deviances. I will give you a very stupid example. If you look at somebody's Facebook profile and they say my favorite music, and it says Mozart there, right? But then if you look at their Facebook wall and somebody's typed in there, hey John, I finally got the Britney Spears ticket that you wanted, right? So you can tell that sort of a deviance is this individual, by way of his or her Facebook profile, wants to come off as more sophisticated, at least when it comes to the music taste, than they are, right? And what social profiles end up being are what I like to call outward identity claims. A Facebook social profile is not something the owner of that profile sees every day, right? In the same way as if you step into somebody's office and they have their family pictures on their desk facing you, what you can tell about those pictures are those certificates that they have on their desk. And if it's facing you, and if the owner of that office is not looking at it all the time, those are outward identity claims, where the owner of that office is telling you, the visitor, hey, look at my wonderful family, look at my accomplishments. But if you see somebody's office desk with private pictures and private, or certificates facing them, in front of their monitor, that's for their own private use. Social profiles are outward identity claims. This is a curious side effect of social profiles. I just wanted to point this out. I think a lot of people are struggling with it. The recent Twitter hacks are based on this problem. Is if you look at most of the free cloud, everybody likes to call them cloud now, but a free, webmail services, for example, where people are, using webmail more often than not. I mean, 5 years ago, I would say, no, I'm going to pop my email. I dare not store anything on anybody else's web store. But now my entire email is on Gmail because it's just convenient. And these free service providers that have millions of accounts, Gmail has millions of accounts, they cannot afford to have an 800 number that free users can call when they forget their password. So they implement these self-service password reset schemes that are based on a secret question that the individual picks, right, when you sign up for the account. But because of the amount of information people are sharing on social media, it is actually really difficult to pick a secret question and then not give it away when somebody just asks you. So if I were targeting you, I mean, in this case, the secret question is, which school did I study in? In addition to the location information you have to guess to reset this person's Hotmail password or Windows Live password, but that information is on this person's Facebook contact page, all of it. But I will also likely to tell you that if this person had not had that information on their Facebook page and their profile, you could, take a look at this person's, assume this person has a LinkedIn profile and a Facebook profile. Go to his LinkedIn profile, figure out, who his friends are, then go to his Facebook list of friends, pick one friend he has on LinkedIn that is not linked up with Facebook, set up a fake profile, friend him, and then just ask him on his wall, what school did you go to, right? This sort of communication has not really been possible. And so a lot of providers that are relying on these old school password reset schemes are facing this, the users are facing this issue now. This is Sarah Palin's Yahoo email account that was hacked, going along the same principle. And here's the message board post by the person who reset her Yahoo password. I think one of the things that's funny here is he says that he had to guess her zip code, and Wasilla has only 2 zip codes, so that wasn't terribly difficult. And the other information he was just about to gather from Googling and Wikipedia. PayPal is probably the worst offender of the password reset features. If you have a PayPal account and if you have no financial instrumentation attached to your account, even if you have some money there, I can reset your password by just knowing your phone number. But at the moment you attach your financial instrumentation, your password secret question kicks in. So even if you have a secret question, it doesn't kick in if you don't have financial instrumentation attached. So a lot of my friends, this is a dear friend of mine, Dylan, who runs the Hack in the Box conference. And he was, he, like most of the people in security, realized that he's not going to be using PayPal for a couple of months. And so he went back to his PayPal account and removed the linkage between his PayPal to his bank account because he didn't want the link to exist. And as soon as he did that, according to PayPal, there's no financial instrumentation attached. So all I had to do is go to PayPal and say, forgot my password, put Dylan's email address, and it told me, what's your phone number? And it even gave me the last 2. And as soon as you guess the phone number, it'll just let you pick a new password. So jumping into LinkedIn, I'm going to tell you something that's been researched before, but I'm going to make a slightly different point. With permission of one of my friends, let's call him John, I set up a fake LinkedIn profile. And I sent a LinkedIn connect request to Jack, who I knew was a friend of John. And so when Jack linked up with John, other people who knew Jack, looked at Jack's page and said, oh, John's on LinkedIn. And within a few minutes, I had incoming requests from other people who knew John to link up with John. And then within a day or 2, I had about 83 connections. So the obvious point here is, the more powerful you are, the more influential you are in your career, the more the secrecy of your address book is probably more important to you, right? For example, if you're a consultant and you recently are working on a proposal with a client who has an RFP out, and I'm your competitor, and I know you're working with this client, but I don't know who the point of contact is, right? But if you recently add somebody on LinkedIn from that company, now I can have a better hypothesis on who I should be going after. There are a lot of behavioral things you can do with social linkages. For example, if company A and company B are rumored to be going through talks to, go towards a merger, right? And then if you watch people from company A and company B linking up with each other at a ratio that exceeds prior known thresholds, now you can put forth a hypothesis that this merger is probably really taking place. So this sort of subliminal data leakage is what really I'm interested in. And this will take me to network and link analysis, which I'll go to next. And before I go there, the one point I do want to make is from a cultural and social perspective. This is a good example. This individual was arrested for DUI. I think he hit an old lady and she didn't survive it. And while the court proceedings were ongoing, he shows up at his friend's, one of his friend's fancy dress parties, dressed up in a jail suit with the word jailbird written on it, almost mocking what's going on. And this ended up on somebody's Facebook page, and the judge got to see it. And I think the judge publicly acknowledged that this photograph did not help this individual. But the point I'm trying to make here is these sorts of things are persistent. That is, if you put something out there, or if anybody puts anything out there, it stays. You can't take it back. So this individual could repent for the rest of his life, but whenever somebody Googles him, this is what will show up. This was I did this presentation for a slightly less technical audience where I had to describe what Twitter is. And so I had this video, so I'm just going to skip it. Twitter. We have a lot of more powerful people using Twitter, at least trying to use Twitter, in a near real-time basis, right? By the way, when it comes to social media, one of the things I slightly dislike about being a security professional is I only get the opportunity to stand up here and talk about the negative side of things. I think social media is beautiful and I use it too, but I just wanted to kind of make that point. So going back to Twitter, the interesting thing is, as we have in this case a lot of politicians using Twitter or trying to use it in a near real-time basis, there's a lot of information you can gather from them using Twitter. I'm not sure if you can see what's below the red circles there, but that's really, for example, one of the congressmen is using Twitterberry. John McCain likes to use SMS to update his tweets. I think that's valuable information, as we have the Secret Service trying to spend so much resources into protecting Obama's BlackBerry. Knowing what software these individuals are using may help a malicious entity. But the bigger point I want to make here is, as these powerful individuals are starting to, in real-time basis, update, for example, where they are, you might retort back and say, well, if somebody says I'm at a press conference and tweets it, well, everybody knows that, so what's the security risk? Well, that in itself may not be a problem, but the dashboard of where everybody is at one given time has been impossible to collect prior. So, for example, I could use the Twitter API to watch 20 people at a given time, 20 congressmen or somebody in politics, and then mash that up with the Google API and have a view and a dashboard of where everybody is at one time. So a different view to the information that's being presented out there may be an issue. Barack Obama's Twitter account was hacked, and I think the point here is the more influential the social media accounts are, the more they can be used for bad things. For example, I think one of the more popular Twitter accounts recently was hacked, and somebody tweeted a malicious URL. And if you have 1 million people following this person, you are guaranteed at least 500,000 clicks plus. The Twitter vulnerability for spoofing caller ID was something I found 2 years ago, where I was able to send out a tweet as anybody, as long as I knew their cell phone number by spoofing their SMS number, and of course assuming that they had linked their cell phone with their Twitter profile. One of the other examples is as this one congressman is being protected by Secret Service as he lands into Iraq, he whips out his BlackBerry and tweets where he is. I thought that was kind of hilarious. What I want to do is talk about Twitter a little bit more because the microblogging channel is of utmost interest to me. One of the reasons being is it's unedited, it's raw, and it's almost usually brutally honest. So if you are writing a blog, for example, you are likely to re-edit it. You're likely to spell check it. But if you are tweeting something in a microblogging channel, you're more likely to be informal, not really read it even after typing it, so you're more likely to be honest. So Twitter has been of utmost interest to me. And last November, when the terrorist attacks against Bombay took place, now known as Mumbai, it was of interest to me because I was born in Bombay. And while I was in my apartment in Seattle, I kind of used Twitter to kind of keep up with exactly what was going on. I think the Bombay case is special because it was a terrorist attack in a metro area that was prolonged. You know, it was about 2 days. You compare that to something like a 9/11, where the actual attack was, a matter of seconds, right, or a matter of minutes. So I ended up looking at Twitter for a good 1 or 2 days to see how Twitter was used. And I want to put forth hypotheses on how it maybe can be abused if something like this were to happen, a prolonged attack in a developed country. So during the Bombay attacks, I think the statistics show that there were about 6 Twitter messages being posted per second. Now, if the attack took place in a developed country like the US, I could probably guarantee you a lot more than 6 Twitter messages per second. There were people talking about what they felt about the attacks, agreeing sometimes. It's a good thing. A lot of people felt it was a bad thing. But of most interest to me were the people on the scene posting Twitter messages, the so-called citizen journalists, right? And so we'll get to that. We have this one individual who was a neighbor of one of the, I think it was called Nariman building, where the terrorists were held up, and they had commandos drop on the roof of this building to try to get the terrorists out of there. So we have this one individual who actually in real time starts taking pictures of the commandos dropping, the choppers coming down, putting it up on his Flickr page, and then tweeting about it. Now, at the same time, going back to my Generation Y comment, most of the terrorists, I think, if not all, were 32 years or early 30s to younger, right? And so when we have the new and the younger generation that's coming not only into the workforce, but as older people grow older, the younger people are likely to be the bad guys too. And the terrorists were actually found with Google Maps software and Blackberries. Now I'm not suggesting that they actually used Twitter. I don't think they did. But my point here is that in the near future, if an attack like this were to take place, it would be unreasonable to assume that physical terrorism, the people who perform these attacks or these acts I think it would be a good hypothesis to say they're more likely to be well versed with technology. So in this case, the abuse case would be, and this individual who was posting these photographs in real time, there are people going back and forth and asking him things like, can you see 6 commanders or can you see 9? And of course he was responding back saying, I think I can see 6. Oh wait, there's one more dropping down. Now, imagine a situation where you have a prolonged attack and you have an accomplice, talking to citizen journalists and obtaining all this information and then supplying it back to the bad guys. That's my use case here. The other interesting thing that happened during the Bombay attacks was this Twitter message on the top left that went out saying, JJ Hospital needs A- type blood urgently. Please call Ashwin at this phone number if you can donate. And this hospital actually did receive a lot, this blood, I think by way of Twitter, by way of this actual Twitter message, which what people ended up doing is looking at this Twitter message and then retweeting it so their friends, so the message kind of spread across the Twitter network. Now the abuse case here is pretty simple, right? Is if I were somebody with a twisted mind who just wanted to get in the way of a rescue effort like this. Again, my point here is, if a incident like this were to occur in a developed country, you could be reasonably assured that Twitter is likely to be used for many additional rescue efforts than it was in just one case in Bombay. So if I had a twisted mind, I could just retweet that message with a different phone number, and that would get retweeted. And so the original message, the rescue efforts, are lost, right? And that would in turn spread undue panic and fear. Which did happen. During the Bombay attacks, I remember this message kind of floating around saying, the terrorists are watching Twitter. Somebody just typed that, and then everybody retweeted that. And what does the BBC do? They take that and publish it as fact. Now, of course, that speaks for journalism today, but what it also speaks for is the influence that social media, that everyday people are having on what's reported, right? You turn on CNN today, you see the Facebook Connect, and the times they talk about Twitter, that's pretty obvious. I do want to end with how Twitter can be used by law enforcement for something good. One of the last two US plane crashes, well not two recent US plane crashes, were first reported on Twitter by a matter of seconds, either by somebody who was in the plane crash, right? You can get faster reporting than that. Or by somebody who actually saw a plane line into the water. So even if you think about the authorities, that are likely to, in traditionally are likely to kind of realize that something like this is taking place, when you have people on the scene and people involved in the incident, first-handedly reporting this, you can do better than that. So which is a good thing. And then if you think about the powerful API that's available on top of social media applications today, imagine if you are Secret Service and you are escorting Obama from the White House to Manhattan, New York. One of the things you could do is filter the public Twitter feed based on GPS coordinates and say, just show me the Twitter messages as Obama travels from these locations, right? And if you have, for example, in Manhattan, because that's what you're watching, because President Obama has landed there, somebody tweeting the word smoke 10 times, or other people tweeting the word smoke more than 10 times in a 30-second period, somebody should look at that, right? So my point here is that the APIs that the powerful social media applications are exposing today can be leveraged for decision making. And of course, if this was a non-security conference, I'd be talking about how this can be used for business decisioning as well. So let's jump into one of my favorite topics, network and link analysis. This is an older, I do have more friends now on Facebook, but this is my I think slightly dated Facebook network graph. And my point here is that just by looking at this graph, you're just seeing points, dots that represent my friends. you can tell a lot about my network even without knowing who these people are, right? One of the things you first look at is say, well, he has one big network that is separate from another network. And you could now put forth the hypothesis that maybe one of the networks is his work and professional friends, and the other one is, his cousins and family. And you'd be right in saying that. The other thing you would probably do is take a look at each one of the dots and see which dot knows most of his other friends. That dot is likely to be more influential to him than his other friends, right? So if you can see on the right side, there are two dots that are just really don't know anybody else in my network. I know those people, but I was just too nice to ignore their connection request. So okay, so now we get to good stuff. If you've come to my previous talk at Black Hat last year, I was presenting with a friend of mine named Billy Rios on fishing, the fishing underground. And one of the things I did for that research is I scoured through dozens and dozens of underground message boards where people are outright selling stolen credit card numbers. I mean, that's their business, right? Or attempting to. And I found this one individual who was posting on about 12 different message boards trying to sell stolen credit card numbers. And he had the same handle across the 10 or 12 message boards. And so you can see on the top right, the first two boxes with text, top right and middle left, his actual message board posting where he is selling stolen credit card numbers. But on one of the message boards, when you look at his actual real profile, he mistakenly typed in his Yahoo IM handle, which happened to be the Yahoo IM handle he used in his personal life, not a Yahoo IM handle that was used specifically or set up specifically by him for this purpose. I think he just made a mistake. And so the point here is, just by that one mistake, right, I was able to connect his scam artist life with his personal life. And so if you look below the X, on the right side, that's the guy, right? One of the things I took out is he actually currently works at the University of Toronto medical office. On the left is his baby picture. On the bottom of the X is his profile on a dating site, talking about what kind of a girl he's looking for. So when I showed this to one of my friends, he said, well, how do you really know you got the right guy? And I said, well, you're right, maybe we should investigate a little bit more further. And that's when I realized that on the top right, this person has a habit of eating his eyes, right? And a lot of people do that. So you begin a sentence instead of saying I am, you'll just say am, right? Just short form, informal. And if you see the three rectangles, that's when he's eating his eyes. But if you look below, where he's posting on a dating site, talking about what kind of a girl he's looking for, he eats his eyes, right? In the same way. So my point here is that you can use textual analysis on top of link analysis to derive more information about what you're looking at. So for this case study, I relied upon an Associated Press news article where a lesbian couple was arrested for abusing a child they had custody over. One of the things I realized is both of these individuals, the lesbian couple, both of them were on MySpace and they were linked up with each other, right? So I said, well, let's do this case study. I am going to assume that I only know one of the individuals, and that's Casey. Can I, by just looking at her MySpace profile and the friends she has, put together a list of friends that are likely to be the second person? right? And so what I ended up doing is I went to Casey's MySpace page and I said, Casey, who are your friends? And so you'll see Casey's friends. And when you draw a network graph for that, what you get is a star graph, which basically gives you no information. It is noisy, right? So a lot of people look at MySpace and say, there's not much going on here. There's too much noise to ever derive any information about a given entity. The next thing I did was I went to each one of Casey's friends. For example, I went to IDK on the top right, and I looked at IDK's friend list and see if IDK knew friends that Casey knew, right? So I did that for all of Casey's friends. And when I did that, I ended up with a graph like this. So IDK, for example, on top right, there's 3 dotted lines coming out of IDK, which basically means that IDK is connected to 3 friends that are also friends of Casey. And therefore, the connection between KC and IDK is stronger. Therefore, the line is bigger, right? Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take away the weak links. So if you take away the weaker links, here's what you end up with. And in this case, Prince EC wins because Prince EC seems to know a lot more people that KC knows than anybody else. And Prince EC was the second individual in the Associated Press article. Now my point here is, okay, maybe I did get lucky. Maybe I did this computation and I got Prince EC, I got lucky. But my point here is that if you are, when law enforcement goes after a particular suspect or knows somebody has committed a crime and wants to find his or her accomplice, the traditional way is to interview the criminal's friends, to actually go to the scene of crime, to talk to his or her neighbors. I mean, that sort of physical interaction takes time, it costs money. And my idea is that's something that should still be done. But if a known criminal has a social profile where they're active, it can be leveraged for decisioning. So now I'm going to jump into the sentiment side of things. This is a website just like Twistory, but I like this one better. It's called wefeelfine.org. And what wefeelfine does is something similar to Twistory, is it scours the social web, and whenever a sentence is found when somebody is expressing a feeling, it will display it in an art form. And you can kind of even say things like, show me the feelings expressed by men aged 18 to 24 based in Iraq. And it will kind of reorg everything and show you a new art form. And so the research I did, drawing inspiration from this, is I said, okay, We Feel Fine is scouring the web and displaying everybody's sentiment in an art form. What if I were to target a specific individual? So if you are popular on a social space, what if I were to able to look at everything you've said in the past 1 year, for example, and just draw some conclusions or some idea on were you more depressed in November than you are now? I mean, those sorts of things. The We Feel Fine website has a spreadsheet that you could go download that contains 1,000 words that are more commonly used to express feelings. And what I did is I went through the spreadsheet and I assigned 1 to a word that I felt, I made a judgment call, that a word that sounds like a happy word. And I assigned -1 to a word that I felt sounded like a sad word, not happy. And -2 to a word that seemed like an angry word. And based on that, I developed a proof of concept visual on using Silverlight. That I'll show you a video of that tool. It's basically broken up into 3 parts. It feeds off an RSS feed. Right? Now that RSS feed could be a culmination of somebody's Facebook status RSS, their blog, their Twitter RSS, and so on. So you could kind of use Yahoo pipes to stitch all together and then feed it to this tool. So what this tool does is, from backwards in time, goes through the entries by date. Whenever it finds a word that expresses feelings, it will measure it. So on the top, you'll see a line graph that tends upwards as the sentiment is positive and tends downwards when the sentiment is negative. You will see a line bar below the line graph that is either blue for sad, yellow for happy, or red for angry. That is a culmination and average of all the sentiments that are collected. Below which you will see a word cloud, where words that are being expressed, that are being captured, that are expressed sentiment, will grow in size on frequency. But before I show you that tool, let me tell you the data I fed to that tool. Again, this is based off another Associated Press article. Someone with a known criminal history, and I realized this person had a Facebook profile still active. And if you look at his Facebook profile, for a good 6 to 9 months, he writes about how much dislike he has for his spouse, and he ends up using a lot of questionable language, to the point where if any normal person were to read that, you would be afraid for him and his family. I mean, this was not a normal person. And so he keeps doing that for a good 6 to 9 months. And then one fine day he writes, he expresses the same sentiment about how he still expresses a negative sentiment, but using happier sounding words. Where if you were to read his last blog, you would say, well, I can kind of understand this guy because he's not using cuss words anymore. He's not calling out his wife. But he also refers to his child, which we'll get to, in the past tense. But we'll get to that. So when he updates his blog, after for 9 months, being the same angry person, even though he's talking that he's still saying this relationship is still not a good relationship, he's using happier sounding words. And 5 days or 3 or 5 days after he does that, according to the Associated Press article, he shows up at home, kills his wife, kills his kid, and then shoots himself. And I'll get to the point I'm trying to make here. Okay. Okay, so this is the video running on this person's MySpace profile or blog. You can kind of see that the sentiment is tending downwards as it starts to pick up, and you can see the words pop up that are usually expressing feelings. The culmination of his sentiment is blue, it's negative, and that it stays that way for some time, right? In the end, you'll see it just starts to pick up abnormally, deviating earlier thresholds of his sadness. And you'll see the blue bar turn to yellow, right? That's when his last blog, that he kind of uses happier sounding words, they just seem a little bit different than the way he's written in the past 9 months, right? Now my point here is this. When this incident occurred and this person committed the murder and killed himself, if I'm somebody investigating this case, right, I'll probably be asking myself, what happened? What happened to this guy? What did he change? Did he flip 5 days ago? What's wrong? And as investigators try to answer these questions, my point simply here is knowing when a criminal or somebody has a presence on a social media site, use it. It will help you in your decision-making process. That is really my point here. I am not suggesting that this could ever be used on a proactive basis, at least today, to predict that he was about to do something bad. It could in some cases. I came across this paper that was written a while ago on how to use textual analysis to predict the truth value of what somebody is saying. And if you apply it to this individual's text before and after, the idea is based on three principles. People who use first-person pronouns are associating themselves with what they're saying. If they use less of it, they're disassociating with it. A common example of this is, walk into your boss's office and he really wants you to do something and he'll say we, right? Because he's dissociating himself and doesn't want you to come out and say, no, you are going to do this. So in a similar fashion, if you look at the text that this individual wrote up before committing the crime, long before, he uses a lot of I, me, my's, which basically means that he is associating himself with what he's saying. He's writing something that's negative about his family, and he means it. Higher negative emotions, liars feel tension and guilt. He uses a lot of negative words, right? There's indication of tension and guilt. Fewer exclusive words, right? That liars seem to want to use, which to me is the most interesting part of this. And I think I can sum it up on an example like if you asked me if I went for a walk yesterday, if you asked me what I did yesterday at 6 p.m., and let's assume I want to lie to you and say I went for a walk yesterday at 6 p.m. I'm more likely to tell you I went for a walk yesterday at 6 p.m. But if I really did go for a walk, I'm more likely to tell you something like, I thought I wanted to have a glass of wine, but I decided against that. I just thought I'd go for a walk. The reason between those two, the differences between those two things is because if I'm really lying, the cognitive part of my brain is busy making up the lie. So I'm more likely to use fewer exclusive words. And you can see the difference as in the last message, the profile update he does before he commits the crime. The other thing I want to point out here is he refers to his child as if he's never going to see his child again. In cases like this, parents or relatives that have harmed the child, I know that the child is not alive anymore, for example, when they're investigated, are likely to refer to the children as if they're never going to see them again or in the past. So I thought that was kind of interesting that he did that a couple of days before he actually committed the crime. So talking about sentiment analysis, one of the other interesting things to me is if I wanted to kind of capture the emotional state and then think about how I may be able to social engineer you. For example, if I realize that you seem a little bit more depressed today than you were 10 months or 6 months ago, in order for me to contact you in a social space and tell you something, I need to know what your personality is and how you react in terms of depression or stress or happiness. And the more you collect information from somebody who's active on the social space, you can, in essence, take a personality test on their behalf. So if you take the Big 5 personality test, for example, one of the first questions is, do you like parties or do you like crowds or do you like being alone? And you have a Twitter message from somebody saying, I hate parties. Well, you know the answer to that question. The more information you collect, you can end up constructing a personality profile for individuals based on the information you collect about them. And so this is the same proof of concept I showed you previously on somebody else's social space. And one of the things you can realize here is in the middle you'll see the sentiment 10 downwards, and the first time it drops, that's when this individual blogs about his dear friend being laid off, right? And so you can see the word layoff show up in the word cloud too. The curious thing is, I can't show the visual here, but if you look at the other dots that are also negative, sloping downwards, within a few minutes of when he first posted the blog about his friend, that's him on Twitter, that's him on Facebook. And you'll see that his sentiment is negative on Facebook and Twitter too, right after he blogged about his friend, right? So you can put forth the hypothesis that maybe his friend being laid off is weighing on him, and therefore he's just not happy right now, right? And actually the person I used to capture this information is a good friend of mine. I was just showing him this, and I kind of showed him his blog about the layoff, and I showed him the couple of Twitter messages he put up a few minutes after that, and I, based on this visual, asked him, do you think that was affecting you? Because even though you were talking about something else on Twitter, and you look at the right and the left side of things, he's normally a happy guy. And he kind of looked at me and said, yeah, I think you're right that the news of my friend being laid off was weighing on me, but I didn't realize it myself until you showed me this visual, right? So I think that is a powerful thing. So sentiment analysis, capturing sentiment, link analysis, and network analysis. These are the sorts of things that intrigue me and interest me as more and more people get onto the social space, because these are ways of collecting or deriving information from social space that are subliminal, that are not obvious, right? If you go on LinkedIn or you go on Facebook or you go on Twitter, the social application is not going to tell you or give you this information. That is something you as an analyst will have to derive. So there's a lot of subliminal information that can be used for decision making from a malicious perspective, or even from a business decisioning perspective, that can be leveraged more than what's on the face value. So that's really all I had for this presentation, and now I will open it up to questions. Yes.
I have a question about earlier on you discussed the difference between versus public facing or private facing. And you mentioned that social networking sites offer very public things. Towards the end of this, you mentioned that you kind of personality profile types that you have of your person. But it seems like what you're getting is a public face.
Yeah.
So you're really building a picture of who they want to be versus who they really are.
I think you're right. And if I were to build a personality profile on somebody, I think the point you're making is true, that I would have to be cognizant of the information I'm getting. And I would have to, in that algorithm, put forth checks to see, I'm capturing this information. Can I, based on what other people are telling him or her, catch him lying and then correct that information in that data set?
That was kind of leading into the second part of the question. If you're cognizant of that, have you looked at the possibilities of that information as factual, comparing that to what they are versus what they'd like to be, or the discrepancy? Is that?
I think that is interesting. I haven't looked at that, but I'm extremely interested in those sorts of things. I haven't. Yeah. Well, there's the thing. From a leverage perspective, I've talked to some agents in Secret Service. I've given them this presentation. They felt it was intriguing. I am slightly pessimistic about the bureaucracy in government. I don't know if they'll ever do anything about it. But I think the more interesting point to that is, if an incident like this, where the Bombay incident were to occur in the United States, how would law enforcement prevent citizen journalists from being abused? That is a very good question. I don't have the answer to that, because if that is, in short of shutting off the channel, what Iran did, to Twitter, I don't have an answer to that. But I think that is a problem. Yeah. Right. Well, thank you so much. I will be hanging around here if you have any questions.